While the American Revolution sent shockwaves through the Old World, the war proved to be more of an accelerated evolution as American life remained the same fundamentally. What the new nation now faced was the monumental task of building a government from the ground up. The unifying document of America at the time was the Articles of Confederation, which had been hastily cobbled together during the war. The Articles clearly reflect the political climate of the time. America had just thrown off an evil imperial power. They were not about to place another strong central government upon themselves. As a confederation, states' rights were supreme, leaving the unicameral legislature the impossible task of trying to decrease the debt incurred by the Revolution with no authority to raise taxes on the population. While the states had banded together during the war in the face of their common enemy, once the British had left the continent, all sense of unity vanished. Finally, in 1786, Alexander Hamilton and George Washington opened their eyes to the fact that something had to be done. The primary cause of this awakening was the shocking Shays Rebellion that flared up in Massachusetts. After the meeting of 55 delegates in Philadelphia and the saving grace of the Great Compromise, the Constitution was ratified. Unanimously selected, George Washington was the ideal first president under the Constitution. Being uniquely humble for a person in his position, the electors would be sure that Washington would not become a king. A major domestic affair of this time was the ratification of the Bill of Rights, meant to protect individual liberties from the federal government. One of the most brilliant minds of his day, Hamilton steadfastly pioneered the establishment of the national bank and a public debt in order to rescue the country from the financial woes of the war. His battle for the bank against Thomas Jefferson introduced the lasting rivalry between strict and loose constructionists. This argument eventually permeated the country and saw the emergence of partisan politics in the enmity between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The French Revolution drove an even deeper wedge between the competing factions, as the Hamiltonians wished to remain neutral, while the Jeffersonians were decidedly pro-French. Washington's neutrality proclamation allowed us to avoid war with Britain or France, elude dirty politics in the XYZ affair, and escape only with the wounds of John Jay's Treaty. One of the most potent effects of the French Revolution on American culture was the Alien and Sedition Acts, passed under President John Adams. These harsh laws secured the fate of the Federalists and nearly guaranteed Jefferson the presidency. Despite fervent, dirty campaigning, the Revolution of 1800 saw the peaceful passage of power from the Federalists to the Democratic Republicans. The vestigial remnants of the Federalist Party lay in the Supreme Court thanks to Adams' midnight judges scandal and Chief Justice John Marshall's decision in Marbury v. Madison. One of the defining events of Jefferson's presidency was the Louisiana Purchase, which about doubled the size of the country for 3 cents an acre. This incredible bargain set the precedent for acquisition of foreign territory through purchase. While Jefferson triumphed with the Louisiana Purchase, he failed miserably with the introduction of the Embargo Act of 1807. Trying to avoid British and French seizure of American ships by closing off shipping, the Embargo Act nearly killed American commerce, earning it the nickname, "Oh, grab me." Towards the end of his career, and the beginning of James Madison's, the embargo was replaced by the Non-Intercourse Act and the Macon Act. The War of 1812 is often referred to as the Second War for Independence, as it was crucial in proving to the world that America was indeed a force to be reckoned with. Although the main cause of the war was eliminated before it started, and the deciding battle was fought after the peace treaty was signed, the War of 1812 holds enormous value in its effects on the American psyche. The period after the war saw the emergence of true American nationalism. Authors like Washington Irving and James Fenimore Cooper garnered national acclaim, and painters began to celebrate the beauty of the American wilderness. While the time period of President Monroe is referred to as the era of good feelings, this period was characterized by economic hardships. Over-speculation in land prices caused the Panic of 1819, which then formed a pattern of economic depressions every 20 years in the 1800s. Slavery added yet another strain to the country when Missouri sought admission to the Union in 1820. The Missouri Compromise only bought the country more time. Sooner or later, they were going to have to tackle this peculiar institution head on. The election of 1824 revolutionized American politics. Andrew Jackson, the hero of the Battle of New Orleans, received the majority of the popular vote, but failed to win a majority of the Electoral College. The decision had to be made by the House of Representatives, which was headed by Henry Clay. In what was dubbed the corrupt bargain, John Quincy Adams won the presidency, and Clay was suspiciously appointed as his Secretary of State. The people were outraged that their voice was apparently not heard, causing Jackson to win a landslide victory in the election of 1828, despite the emergence of mudslinging campaigns from both parties. Thus started the era of the common man. Although heralded as the leader of the people, Jackson is notorious for his policies on Indian removal, which ousted nearly 100,000 Native Americans from their ancestral homelands and into Oklahoma along the Trail of Tears. Another hallmark of Jackson's terms was his defeat of Nicholas Biddle and the Bank of the United States, which was threatening to tank the American economy. When the 1836 election came around, King Andrew was too old to serve another term. He instead handed the reins over to a hand-picked successor, Martin Van Buren. The dawning of the 19th century was characterized by America's need to move west. Manifest destiny had taken hold, and the frontier was wide open. The 1800s saw a significant increase in the nation's population, but this boom could not be attributed to American fertility, but rather to the pull factor of American opportunity. Millions of Irish and German immigrants flooded off ships in search of land, freedom from state and church aristocracy, and the promise of 3 meat meals a day. America was a land of plenty for these European immigrants, and even though the conditions they faced in the overcrowded cities may not be what we perceive as attractive, these people were often better off than their European relatives. The American reaction to the influx of foreigners was to establish a nativist movement and generally ostracize the Irish and Germans. This era also saw the rise of mechanization in American industry. Eli Whitney's cotton gin and Robert Fulton's steamship revolutionized business practices and enabled American goods to compete with their cheap British rivals. Women began to enter into the workforce as industrialization picked up speed, which redefined gender roles and families. The biggest change of this time was the introduction of the railroad and the Erie Canal, which finally allowed goods to be transported latitudinally. The age of the small subsistence farmer was over. America was entering into a more modern age and identity. Along with the economic revolution of the 1800s came vast cultural shifts, beginning with the Second Great Awakening. This religious revival sparked many important reform movements, such as temperance, public education, and abolition. Women began to take on a role in the public sphere, as preachers empowered them to guide their husbands down a path of piety and righteousness. People such as Robert Owen formed utopian societies, often based on transcendentalism, and committed to creating the perfect community. A true American literature blossomed during this time, with such authors as Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and Walt Whitman leading this cultural surge. Altogether, the antebellum period shows the emergence of America as a complete and contributing country, well on its way to becoming a global power. But before its destiny could be fulfilled, the country would have to reconcile the omnipresent issue of slavery.